Good afternoon. I'm Yasha Franklin Hodge, the Chief Information Officer for the City of Boston. We are here this afternoon to consider a request for a license transfer of the Open Video System license held by RCN Telecom to provide video service in the City of Boston. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Mike Lynch, the Director of our Office of Broadband and Cable, to kick off the proceedings and take us through the agenda today.
Thank you, Yasha. I appreciate it. I want to take this opportunity to introduce RCN Telecom Services of Massachusetts representatives. They are, to my far right, Jeff Carlson, Vice President and General Manager for Boston and Massachusetts, and Tom Steele, Vice President for Regulatory and Law. And if I remember correctly, I think that's a national title for you, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Corporate, I'm corporate.
All right, you're corporate. Our purpose here today, as Yasha had stated, and on behalf of the Mayor, Martin J. Walsh, is to review the Form 394 transfer request, which was received by the city on September 12th and is available online, and I believe you'll see that on a slide right now on your screen. Mr. Steele has offered a PowerPoint presentation, which we will introduce now, and would like to have him walk through the transaction, which is somewhat complicated, but essentially a private equity firm by the name of TPG is acquiring two cable companies, RCN Telecom Services and Grande Communications out of Texas, I believe. And they're going to transfer them to a firm called Radiate Holdings, which is a subsidiary, and a minority investor is also involved, and I believe Mr. Steele will touch on that, and that is Google Capital, the Alphabet Inc. Growth Equity Investment Fund. Mr. Steele?
Thank you. For today's discussion, we'll talk briefly about how the system's ownership has changed, who is TPG, how will the transaction be financed, who will manage and run the system, and what we perceive as the benefits of the transaction. The local RCN franchisees are currently indirect subsidiaries of Yankee Cable Partners, which is an affiliate of Abry Partners, and Abry is based here in Boston and took over ownership of our system back in 2010. As far as the transaction, an entity affiliated with TPG Partners VII, LP, has entered into an agreement to acquire control of the local RCN franchisees. After the transaction closes, Radiate Holdings LP, a limited liability partnership that will be majority owned and controlled by TPG, will control the local RCN franchises and in particular for Boston, RCN Telecom of Massachusetts, LLC. Minority, non-controlling equity interests in Radiate Holdings will be held by Google Capital, which is now known as Capital G, Rio FD Holdings, and two members of the Patriot Media's management team will also be board members, bringing it to a total of 7, with TPG having the majority control. Who is TPG? TPG is controlled by David Bonderman and James G. Coulter, founded some 24 years ago. It's while it hasn't been active in the telecom sector, it has been most active in the private equity, as a private equity investor in what the internet ecosystem. Has $73 billion in assets under management and over $8 billion in uncalled capital commitments available to the TPG fund, providing the equity financing for the acquisition of the systems. How is the transaction being financed? The aggregate purchase price of the transaction will be approximately $1.6 billion for RCN. And as Mike mentioned in his opening remarks, Grande Communications will also be part of the purchase for another $625 million, bringing it to $2.25 billion. The purchase price includes amounts required to refinance RCN's existing funded debt. $1.825 billion of new debt is expected to be split as follows. $1.33 billion in 7-year senior secured term loan and $495 million in an 8-year senior unsecured notes. The aggregate equity contributions of, with aggregate equity contributions of $528 million. And I guess this amounts to a letter of credit, a secured commitment for a 5-year, $150 million senior secured revolving facility to support RCN's future liquidity needs. So it's amply financed. A key factor for the city in this deal, in this sale, will be who will manage and run the system. Patriot Media is a management company and has been managing RCN for the past six years. It took over with Abry when Abry came on board. It will continue to manage the systems after the transaction closes. So in other words, TPG will contract with Patriot Management, and the management's team will remain the same. So the sale will be seamless to the customers, both in terms of who's running the system. Jeff and I will stay on board, and the billing will stay the same. There won't be any changes in the way the bill is presented. It's going to be a very seamless transaction as far as the subscriber's view. 2 Patriot Media executives will serve on the initial board of directors of the parent. 1 board member will be appointed by capital G, and 4 will be appointed by TPG, which I covered earlier. We see some of the benefits of the transaction to include continuing the management of the local RCN systems, bringing Grande aboard. They have over 100,000 cable subscribers, and it may serve to enhance our ability to get better financing, our borrowing capability, and certainly our programming arrangements, and establish greater operating efficiencies. The Patriot team has been managing Grande for the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 years. So that, again, is something that will be an easy transition to make it more formally merged into RCN. The increased efficiencies also will facilitate system approvals, such as an upgrade to DOCSIS 3.1, which we'll talk about later. And a well-financed competitive provider that we will be and continue to be tends to drive some of the improvements from the incumbent competitors. If we were to go to a gig for residential service, it won't be long before Verizon and Comcast do as well. We have FCC approval. It's been finalized. We have full FCC approval. We also have HSR, which is Hart-Scott-Rodino, which is approval from the DOJ, Department of Justice, that no antitrust implications. I've been going around getting consents from states and from local franchises like Boston. We have 7 already in the Boston market that have been approved. And the others, we've already had hearings like this, and we're just waiting for the formal word of approval. The expected closing date is as soon as possible after the consents and approvals are obtained. I know it's going to take us into January, so I can't say for sure when it will be, but it'll be sometime in, I would think, in the first quarter next year. So that's, with that, I'll introduce Jeff to just have his brief opening remarks and then turn over to questions.
Thank you. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you all for having us here. Thank you, Tom, for the introduction. My name is Jeff Carlson. I am the Senior VP and GM for the Boston market for RCN. I have been with the organization since right after the Patriot Media people took over in September of 10. And I have relationships going back with the Patriot Media people going back 25 years. I've had a working relationship with Jim Hollanda, our CEO, for 25 years. From my perspective and the perspective of our employees and the customers and the Patriot Media people, and I'm sure TPG, one of the better points of this situation is the continuity that we're all going to see. I think TPG was very interested in seeing the current management stay in place. They liked the philosophies that we had. They like the results that we've had. We believe that we've had a great partnership with the City of Boston, and we intend to continue that. We've had expansion in the city, including about 5,000 homes in Dorchester. and we would like to continue all those considerations going forward as well. And I'm sure the TPG folks, along with Patriot Media, are much more interested in expansion than we were 5 years ago. And as we heard briefly, you know, we are moving right ahead with the 3.1 DOCSIS platform, which would bring Gigabit services to the city of Boston. So all of that is very much on track and anxiously awaited, I'm sure, by our customers, the city, our employees, and the new ownership and management and so forth. So unless Tom thinks I need to augment that, I'll hand it back to him.
The only thing I would add, just is that, you know, I've been personally able to work with the city over the years, and just want to note for the record that we've been able to sustain a $10 a month basic rate for seniors and an overall basic rate of $17.50, which is low for the entire company. I hear about that every year. We're partnered with the mayor's Wicked Free Wi-Fi initiative, offering backhaul support with our fiber. Provided fiber to the city's network for approximately 10 city facilities. Built a video return for the Boston City Council cablecast facilities, and offered Channel 82 as a fifth 5-access channels that we offer to the city. This one is the fifth for government use. We've expanded it, as Jeff said, we expanded into Dorchester. We had built years and years ago when we first came in, a lot of plant was stranded, and we revisited that and came back in and expanded beyond the stranded plant to add new homes. And that's been successful. We committed back in 2010 when the sale to Abry took place to doing at least 50% of our capital budget would be committed to expansion in the city, so that the city wouldn't be left behind as we grew in other areas. And we've been able to live up to that commitment, and we'll continue to do so. And we provided 2 fiber strands between South Station, Bedford Street, Eversource Station, and 43 Hawkins, where Mike's office is, to interconnect the different fiber networks available to the city. So we're always anxious to work with the city in ways that we can be helpful. We have a lot of fiber in the city, and found a partnership with the city to be mutually advantageous.
Thanks, Mr. Steele, Mr. Carlson, thank you both. Tom, you touched on some of the highlights of the relationship that RCN has and the commitments that RCN has made to the city, and we're grateful for them. Can you arrange somehow for Radiate Holdings to describe that these commitments will continue in recognition of both the license and commitments outside the license that have been made?
You mean a more affirmative commitment? Sure.
Great, thank you. At this point, I just want to note that RCN Telecom and Radiate Holdings are complying with our request that we have made for data. I'd also like to note, as Tom had mentioned, that just yesterday the FCC approved this transaction in entirety. What we're doing here today is a process related to the transfer of control on the Boston system only. I am stating the obvious, and I apologize for that, but it's worth bearing. Following this hearing, the city will review the information contained in the initial transfer request and the subsequent data follow-up, analyzing the financial terms of the transfer and the characteristics of the new entity, hosting, as we are today, public comment and continuing that through December 9th, when the comment period for this transfer process will end, evaluating the factors under consideration and their impact on this system, the subscribers, and the city in order to report and recommend to the issuing authority, Mayor Walsh. As a brief sort of follow-up clarification, because of the long history of RCN in Boston related to our electric utility, now Eversource, I'd like to ask Mr. Steele just to clarify the relationship between RCN, who, when they first came into the Boston market, were partly owned, I believe, by Boston Edison. If you can just sort of describe what today's relationship is, that would be appreciative.
Shows you how old that is. We're referring to Boston Edison, not N-Star, and not Eversource. But yes, initially in 1997, RCN entered into a joint venture with then Boston Edison and formed RCN Becocom. That partnership was dissolved in 2004. However, N-Star retained ownership of our network. They actually owned the network, and then we leased space on it. In 2015, we took the added step of essentially buying our own network from then Eversource. So we have no connection whatsoever anymore to the electric utility, neither tightly with the joint venture or loosely through their ownership of our network.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave. State and federal law and regulations outline 4 factors to be considered in determining and recommending a request for transfer of ownership under this 394 process, which technically as an open video system, Boston is not compelled to engage in this process, nor is RCN, but it is within our city contract that we would follow this language, and that's why we're here today. And the 4 factors are, as you can see on the slide, managerial experience to operate the system, technical expertise, financial capability, and legal ability. We've discussed the information regarding the transfer, and we look forward to continuing them. I had a series of questions that I wanted to ask Mr. Steele, and in his presentation today, he has answered partially some of them, but I'd like to still sort of go through them for the record and for some further clarification. As Mr. Steele indicated, Aubrey Partners and RCN introduced a management team back in 2010, the Patriot Media Group. I'd like to know if we could have Mr. Steele or Mr. Carlson describe more fully the relationship and how TPG anticipates maintaining that management relationship with Patriot Media Group going forward.
TPG and Patriot Media have signed a management agreement, an 8-year management agreement. It keeps most, if not all, the senior managers in place, down to and including me, and I assume Mr. Steele. So it's
to know that you're personally vested in this.
We get that on the record every time we have a hearing.
Right. So again, I think they've part of the interest in this arrangement with TPG was that the current management stayed, given the confidence they had in them. So again, continuity and expertise, and I think the relationship is very sound.
That's great. Mr. Carlson, Mr. Steele, is it possible that either one of you actually answered my follow-up questions, and in 8 years is good because 8 years exceeds the 4 years remaining in the term of the current license. Is it possible to get that, if not the agreement itself, some paper evidence of the agreement between?
Yeah, well, the agreement
TPG
would be
and the management
proprietary,
company?
but yeah, we
Right.
certainly
That'd be
can get a
great.
confirmation of that.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I think we already touched on the questions about Google Capital. We had a question here, and just obviously I don't anticipate that the answer will come today, but if you can by December 9th, how much per subscriber did TPG agree to pay Aubrey for control of RCN? And that would be exclusive of Grande. The documentation we received collapsed all entities into one, so we weren't able to discern that.
The per subscriber valuation is really more applicable to the older days when we just had cable subscribers and we were transferring a cable license. In this sale, you have telephone customers, you have broadband customers, and it's hard to describe actually who a subscriber is, because a customer might have all 3 services, 2 services, 1, a variation of the theme. So it's not something that was broken down on a per subscriber basis as we were used to in the past. We know it's 2.25 billion or 1.6 billion. We know how many subscribers. I mean, you could just do the math. But that isn't all that figures into the purchase. You know, increasingly, broadband is valuable, and fiber itself has value on its own.
I think in terms of the data that we had received, how about the possibility of getting the information as percentage of purchase price? Would that be able?
Percent? How do you mean?
I think the breakdown and the clarification in the,
What percentage is Boston?
yeah. If,
I'll see.
thank you. And then sort of as a follow-up question to that, but looking forward, what would TPG, and again, I don't know what is it, TPG or Patriot Management that we would say at this point, but what are TPG's current plans for integration of both RCN and Grande?
I think from a practical standpoint, it's really combining the systems gives us more scale and more buying power. to bring down particularly costs associated with programming. Would give us much more leverage in terms of the deals we cut on programming, and as we know, that's one of the biggest drivers of the economics behind this business right now is the explosive cost of programming. So there's definite benefits in the scale we'd see from combining the two companies.
We really have a jump on this because the Patriot Media team was managing Grande. I've participated over the last couple of years in, sort of working with Grande folks, and there'll be no change in their team, no change in our team, but the merge of the two companies, I think, gives us some of the volume benefits.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because just yesterday the city received a rate notice from you, Mr. Steele, regarding surcharges on broadcast, sports, and entertainment fees that are essentially amount to $6 per month per subscriber. In your transmittal, you indicated that these increases are due to programming costs, but we don't actually have any evidence of that. We simply have the statement of that. As you know, and I know we know because we get the calls, Boston residents are frustrated with these surcharges and they question the lack of an explanation for them. We share the same frustration. I was wondering if you could define the programming cost increases for us and why, say, for instance, broadcast has gone up $2 this year for, I believe, or $1.50 this year for a total of approximately $7.50 a month, I think, right?
Yes, maybe $7.53, I think. The cost of programming is something that in the past, it may have gone up marginally. We would raise our rates, and when people said to us, you're raising your rates, why are you raising your rates? Well, the cost of programming. And they would scoff at that, and we would be left saying, no, well, it's real. In the last few years, we, along with probably the entire industry, pretty much the entire industry, has sought to educate the consumer, if you will, by isolating on the bill, not really a rate increase, but a surcharge that covers the cost only partially of what the programming costs really are. The broadcasters in the past would not insist on dollar payments for our carriage of their programming, but rather would look, if you were NBC, you would want MSNBC, you'd want CNBC, and every 3 years you'd be coming back in the retransmission cycle asking for more channels. You see that with ABC, with all the ESPN channels they have and the like. That stopped. The broadcasters recharged times and decided that they would look for dollars instead. And that they have been doing with abandon. This $7 doesn't even begin to cost cover the cost of what we pay the broadcasters for retransmission consent. However, what we like our consumers to know, our subscribers to know, is that when they pay us that money monthly, we do not receive that in any way as a profit. It's really, we're collecting that money and passing it through to the broadcasters. The same with the networks. The cable networks saw what the broadcasters were getting and said, we want a piece of that as well, and those prices went up. And then the sports programming, as everybody knows, sports programming is outrageously priced, and the cost there went up. When you're in a competitive position of a company the size of RCN, you cannot compete without the full complement of programming. We just can't do it. If we were to drop some of these networks, it would hurt us in a competitive marketplace. So what we've done is become as transparent as we could be and itemize on our bills these surcharges that show what the customers pay us and what we then in turn pay the broadcast networks, the entertainment networks, and sports. It's a real thing. Programming costs are soaring, and again, we do not reap any benefit from it other than to stay in business.
Okay. If you could, so I think to better understand the costs, again, these are surcharges, so these are coming in above, and there is a rate card presumably below this where some of those costs have already been built in. I'm not certain that in the 4 years that surcharges have been applied to the bill, that those are all incrementally new costs. I'm wondering about what has been built in sort of below the line in the initial rate itself. So if you could also provide
Actually,
a rate card for 2017, we would appreciate it.
I can do that, sure.
At this point, I'd like to turn to another element that was previously touched on in the slide presentation, Dave, slide 16. And this is just, I wanted to note for those of us who are participating here today, this is an illustration of the commitment that RCN has made to Boston in terms of its build-out. As the RCN Mass or RCN Greater Boston network has found new capital for investment over the last 7 years, they have shared that with Boston. We asked for that in 2010, and as you can see, they have met and exceeded over the 7 years the commitment by Boston receiving just over half or 55% of the new commitment, and that 13,000 new homes have been passed with RCN. That doesn't help our effective competition claim to the FCC, but I think that's gone out the window as it is anyway.
It's time to give that up.
Just touching on this slide, and Dave, if you can leave that up, I would appreciate it. How does TPG, Mr. Carlson, how would TPG view this capital expansion in the past, and how does it view it going forward?
Well, I think in 2010, when ABRI took over, we made this commitment, and we were happy to fulfill it. At the beginning, I think ABRI had a lot less appetite towards expansion, and you can see, even under those circumstances, we did grow our homes passed in the city of Boston. TPG and the Patriot Media people are much more interested in expansion at this point, given the success we've had in not only the Boston markets, but the other RCN markets. So I think we can look forward to at least this sort of, at a minimum, and we'd be very anxious to talk about other new passing opportunities in the communities we serve in Boston.
You're finding this expansion to be successful?
Yes.
Love that talk. I believe in the last couple of months you've signed with Everett, and Everett is very close to one of our northernmost neighborhoods over there, East Boston. And we thought that maybe you were looking at East Boston. I was wondering if either one of you could share what your plans are today and what you think your plans will be going forward under TPG ownership.
Well, I'll go first for a minute.
Mr. Kelly will block his ears at this time.
We're well aware of, and TPG is well aware of the commitment to, not leave the city behind as we expand elsewhere. Everett being on that sort of north side allows us to come in from a hub we have in Stoneham more easily to serve East Boston. Part of the problem of reaching East Boston was getting from Southie over there and working our way through some right-of-ways issues with the Port Authority and MBTA and all that. It all goes away, so that's very encouraging. I'll let Jeff address where we stand in terms of budget plans and the like, but East Boston is definitely on our radar, and the Everett construction and the Everett franchise will help to facilitate that.
That's great.
Yeah, we have both East Boston and South Boston designed, and this is going to be a very hot subject right after the close with the TPG people. But clearly, they already have information about my views on expansion in the footprint in the marketplace here, and it does include those estimates do include East Boston, South Boston, and other neighborhoods.
In the past, we've tried to expand more in South Boston and ran into some issues with underground construction. Not so much the city's coordination or support, but more with the electric utility and the other utilities. I won't use the word hoarding, but they're hoarding their conduit. And we hope not to have similar problems with that. We're anxious to make sure we coordinate well with the Public Improvement Commission. I know there's some leadership changes there. With the Department of Public Works, because you know what, it's difficult enough to build in the city, But when streets are restored, and then we're told we can't disrupt the streets, it's not cost-effective to do so because you have to restore the whole street again. So we'd love to be able to have a better coordination with the Department of Public Works in particular to make sure that they don't get out ahead of us and forestall our ability to reach neighborhoods.
Well, as you know, I think the city has a program called COBUCS, the City of Boston Utility Coordinating Committee, essentially, that is really designed to make sure that utilities and providers such as yourself who have to get underground can do so in a planned manner in which it's not disruptive to cities build out, stuff like that as well. I don't know, Yasha, if you wanted to touch it all on.
Yeah, a couple of things, excuse me, following up on this line of inquiry. We're certainly happy to see the expansion that has been done in the last few years, and happy to know that you have done the planning work for future expansions in Boston. On that, two things I'd mention. Mike referred to COBUCS, which is our utility coordination system. The Public Works Department has generally expressed an interest to work with utility companies, and even on a purely speculative basis, if there are established plans for where you would need to dig, typically our Public Works Department requests that those plans be made available or be entered into COBUCS at the earliest possible stage. That will give them the opportunity to coordinate with you. In many cases, we, as the city, will actually delay repaving projects to create a window of opportunity for utility companies. But that is the best pathway into that system. The other thing I would refer you to, the City of Boston recently did an inventory of all of the conduit that we own as the city, which may be available for lease by private parties for the installation of fiber. There's a considerable amount of what we call shadow conduit that exists throughout the city that is now a digital map available on our website. We will send you the URL, but there's certainly a footprint in South Boston as well, so please review that to see if it might help. Just in keeping with the broader topic of capital and construction and expansion, I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about the debt structure that will exist once this new combined company is created. And in particular, you mentioned a $1.8 billion new set of debt that will be created, some of which is refinance, some of which is perhaps new. But what I'm curious is whether the new combined entity will have a debt service burden relative to revenue that is lower or higher than what the existing the existing RCN entities possess.
That I don't know.
Okay.
But I can find out.
We'd definitely be interested in learning more about that. You know, as Mike mentioned, one of our responsibilities is to determine the financial capability to operate the system. And you know, you referenced a $150 million revolving credit line, which we appreciate can support sort of day-to-day ongoing operations. You also referenced the hope that increased efficiencies that you might see by this combined entity will create space to facilitate future system upgrades. That said, I think it is a point of some concern by the city that the capital costs associated with continuing to operate a current cable television system are substantial. And if you look at whether it be the relatively incremental upgrade of DOCSIS from 3.0 to 3.1, whether you look at the continued expansion of fiber to the home offerings that we're seeing from other cable companies around the country. Just yesterday, Altice, which owns recently acquired a number of cable systems, announced their intention to convert their entire plant to fiber to the home. Even with no expansion, it's our expectation that maintaining a current cable system will require substantial ongoing infusions of capital. So the question as to whether the new debt structure under this combined entity creates the operational financial headroom to make those capital investments is something that we need to understand and explore, and perhaps your partners at TPG can be helpful in explaining that to us.
You know, after I mentioned billions of dollars so many times my head spins, so I'll be happy to run that by them. Any comments on that, Jeff?
No, I think you'd have to,
Yeah.
you'd have to go to
But we
those
can
folks.
get that, that's,
Yeah.
I'm sure they're able to answer this pretty quickly.
Thank you. Touching on something again that you had referenced earlier in your PowerPoint presentation, but we know that you have plans and TPG has plans for launching new gigabit service in Boston, as I think has previously been announced in other areas that RCN serves around the country. And I think last week there was a report that locally RCN will be doubling their speeds for Boston and your other consumers. With, I think it was a million?
330.
One-third gigabit, 330 megabit. And the price tag on that would be approximately $55. I realize that this is outside the scope of the open video system, but it is clearly that's something that people are interested in. And again, I think when you spoke earlier, you had spoken about the DOCSIS 3.1 technology. And I think that you were indicating that this would be also available at approximately $70 a month?
Correct.
Is that, am I correct in understanding?
$69.99.
$69.99, okay, thank you very much. All right. And then lastly, I wanted to just touch on an issue that we've been working on and make sure that TPG is aware of and is agreeable and amenable to continuing the ongoing revenue review that RCN is engaged in with the city and willing to sort of stand in Aubrey's place, if you will, on that subscribership review and any adjustments due.
I'll tell you what, I'll take the last one first and then
Sure.
let Jeff go back to the other two. On that issue, the matter was brought to our attention by the city. I would expect that that we've got that under a very active review ourselves, and I would think that this would be resolved well before the closing. So it wouldn't be an issue for TPG at all. We'll take care of it within a week or two.
Very good, okay, thank you.
To the extent that, you know, if this transaction is approved by the city prior to that resolution or prior to the closing, I think it will be necessary for us to get those commitments from TPG that they will continue to work with us in this matter.
Absolutely.
Hopefully the timelines will work out.
Right, I agree. I mean, I know what I'm willing to do, I'll just see what the city has up.
And
But we're happy to work with that.
And as Josh had indicated, that is actually true for probably all of the questions that we have asked, that in whatever manner it is possible that TPG sort of formally acknowledge the conversation today and its follow-up, and
Absolutely.
thank you very much, that would
No
help.
problem with that. And
Okay.
Jeff, on the first two, on the gig and the megabits?
Yeah, for the most part, the DOCSIS 3.1 upgrade, the predominance of the capital has already been done. We've already prepared our hubs for the increased speed and the different data protocol that 3.1 runs on. For the most part, the consumer equipment, most of what we've purchased in the past 2 years has been gigabit capable. So we're in a good position, really. We're really down to licensing to get the gigabit services delivered in the footprint, in particular Boston. So it's definitely coming in 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. And before we close this hearing, I just want to invite anybody for any closing comment or comment. Very good. And again, this is just a reminder, and Dave, if you can go to slide number 2, I believe that the okay, never mind. Thank you very much. I have it up there. This hearing is available after the fact, live stream on cityofboston.gov/cable. Any comments that anyone would care to make regarding the RCN transfer? The record will remain open until December 9th. The email address for those comments could be cable@boston.gov, and our phone number is 617-635-3112. Having said all that, I'd like to thank everyone for attendance. I'd like to thank RCN's representatives, Mr. Steele and Mr. Carlson, for their time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.